Have you ever heard of Elijah, the prophet who defied kings, confronted false gods, and witnessed extraordinary miracles? You probably have. But here's a surprising truth. Behind all that greatness lies a secret that could transform your faith and the way you navigate life. Elijah wasn't some invincible hero immune to struggles. He faced discouragement, loneliness, and even moments of wavering faith, things every believer wrestles with. Yet, what set him apart was something simple yet profound: his ability to hear God's voice amid the chaos. Now, think about your own life. Are you battling challenges right now? Financial struggles, family conflicts, or a lingering sense of emptiness? What if I told you Elijah's story holds the key to overcoming them? This isn't just another feel-good message or a collection of Bible stories. It's a practical and spiritual truth that every believer should know. A truth that teaches you how to trust God, even when everything seems to be falling apart. In this video, we'll dive deep into Elijah's journey, from his moments of despair to his heavenly ascension, and uncover powerful lessons that you can apply to your own life. These aren't just inspiring tales, they're tools for transformation. But before we start, let me ask you, are you ready to see life from Elijah's perspective? If so, get ready. What's coming next might just be the breakthrough you've been waiting for. Elijah, the prophet who called down fire from heaven and challenged the idolatry of an entire nation, also faced something many avoid admitting: discouragement. After Elijah's glorious battle on Mount Carmel, where the supremacy of God was undeniable, he was overtaken by a profound sense of emotional and spiritual exhaustion. Isn't it curious that even after witnessing miracles, Jezebel's threat drove Elijah to flee, plunging him into a spiral of fear and isolation? This is a powerful lesson about how even the most faithful can feel overwhelmed by circumstances. After all, who hasn't faced moments when their faith seems small compared to the size of their problems? Elijah reflects all of us, showing that trusting God in internal battles is just as important as facing external giants. Sitting under a broom tree in the desert, Elijah wished for death. Yes, the same man who confronted the prophets of Baal was now too weak to continue. It's a harsh but essential reality. Moments of weakness don't invalidate a person's faith. Elijah showed that recognizing vulnerability is part of the strengthening process. Imagine yourself in a similar situation where difficulties feel unbearable. What would you do? A practical suggestion would be to take strategic breaks in your routine to pray and reflect, remembering that even Elijah, a great prophet, needed rest. This is the point where divine provision begins to operate more tangibly, as we'll see ahead. Elijah's journey in this episode shows that crises of faith can teach us more about God and ourselves. When Elijah fled, he didn't encounter a reproachful God, but one who understood his pain and sustained him. Often we are so busy trying to prove our strength that we forget divine grace is sufficient, even when we think we're failing. Elijah was learning that true rest doesn't just come from sleeping more, but from surrendering to divine provision and trusting God, who knows exactly what we need. It may seem counterintuitive, but relinquishing control is the first step to overcoming discouragement. This episode wasn't the end for Elijah. It was just a transition to something even more significant. God was preparing Elijah for a journey to Mount Horeb, where he would not only renew the prophet's strength, but also reveal something profound. And here begins the great turning point, the divine provision in the desert that would transform the prophet and his mission. Divine provision in the desert. Imagine being in the middle of a desert with no direction, no energy, and no hope. That's exactly how Elijah felt as he fled to save his life. He was at the peak of discouragement, but it was precisely in this desolate setting that divine provision shone brightest. God didn't send complicated answers or harsh reproaches. He sent ravens to feed Elijah, along with bread and water to renew his strength. This simplicity is a powerful reminder. God cares for our basic needs, even when everything around us seems lost. What does this teach us? That trusting God is the foundation for facing any desert in life. But why ravens? A curious choice, isn't it? These birds, usually considered unlikely, became the vehicle of divine provision. This shows that God operates in unexpected ways, using instruments we often overlook. How many times have you received help from where you least expected? Elijah invites us to reflect. Are we open to the creative ways God works, or do we limit his possibilities? In practice, learning to see God's hand in small daily provisions, like an unexpected piece of advice or an unforeseen opportunity, is an exercise in faith that transforms lives. The bread and water Elijah received were not just food, they were a message. You still have a journey ahead. It's as if God was saying, "Don't give up now, I'm here." Elijah needed this reminder, and perhaps you do too. After all, how often do we face crises and feel we don't have the strength to go on? Try, for example, creating a daily moment to give thanks for the small provisions you receive, whether it's an act of kindness, a comforting word, or even the strength to get out of bed. Just as Elijah was strengthened, we too can find renewal when we learn to value what God has already provided. This provision was only the beginning. God didn't just sustain Elijah physically, he prepared him for something greater, a journey to Mount Horeb. There the prophet would experience a transformative encounter with God in one of the most remarkable scenes in the Bible. The journey, however, was just beginning. The journey to Mount Horeb, 40 days and 40 nights. That's how long it took Elijah to reach Mount Horeb, and every step of this journey was a mix of human effort and divine intervention. Don't be mistaken, this was not just a physical trek, but a spiritual crossing, an invitation to fully trust God while facing one's limitations. It's fascinating how God didn't take Elijah directly to his destination. He allowed the process, showing that sometimes growth is found in the journey, not just in the arrival. And like Elijah, we too are often called to walk paths that seem endless but have a greater purpose. During the journey, the desert became a backdrop of deep silence, broken only by the divine presence sustaining Elijah. Have you ever noticed how silence can be uncomfortable? Elijah likely confronted not just physical fatigue, but also the noise of his mind, fears, doubts, memories of the battle on Mount Carmel. In our routines, silence can be a powerful tool to hear what truly matters. Maybe you don't need to walk 40 days, but taking moments to reflect, meditate, and pray can make all the difference. Try turning off the noise around you and asking yourself, what is God trying to teach me during this phase? Upon reaching Mount Horeb, Elijah found a cave, a perfect metaphor for the loneliness he felt and the refuge he sought. However, God had something deeper to reveal. In the cave, Elijah received the simplest yet most provocative question. "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Isn't it curious how sometimes the right question is more powerful than the answer? This same question echoes in our lives. Are we where God has called us to be, or are we hiding in our caves? If you've ever felt stuck or lost, perhaps it's time to revisit your purpose and listen to the calling God has for you. God's revelation came in an unexpected way, not in the wind, the earthquake, or the fire, but in a still, small voice. Elijah, accustomed to great displays of power, learned that God also reveals himself in gentleness, in the calm that renews. It's a reminder that we don't always need spectacular manifestations to perceive the divine presence. Sometimes God's whisper is found in the simplest things, a word of comfort, an act of kindness, or even the pulse of our own faith. And in that whisper, Elijah found the strength to continue as a new mission awaited him. The confrontation on Mount Carmel was the stage for one of the most dramatic and decisive moments in Elijah's journey. Elijah's battle against the prophets of Baal was not just a physical confrontation, but a clash between the truth of God and the false worship consuming Israel. Imagine the scene. Hundreds of prophets of Baal shouting, dancing, and cutting themselves in a desperate attempt to call down fire from heaven, while Elijah stood alone, watching calmly with unwavering trust in God. This episode teaches us a powerful lesson. In times of doubt and opposition, trust in God is the sustaining difference. Elijah's victory was not about strategy, but unshakable faith. Preparing the altar was an act filled with meaning. Elijah didn't rush. He rebuilt the altar with 12 stones, symbolizing the tribes of Israel, and poured water over the sacrifice until everything was soaked. This detail shows that Elijah didn't just want to prove God's reality. He wanted to demonstrate that his power transcends the impossible. How often do we face situations where everything seems too soaked to work? Elijah teaches us that even when circumstances are against us, divine provision is greater. When we pray with confidence, as Elijah did, we should expect answers that defy human logic. The moment fire descended from heaven was more than a spectacle. It was an unquestionable declaration of God's superiority. There was no doubt left among those present. Here we see God's power acting in response to the prophet's faith, a reminder that our trust in God can bring extraordinary results. But beware, Elijah also knew that victory brings new challenges. History teaches us that every triumph comes with responsibilities. When we face our own battles, whether emotional, spiritual, or practical, we must prepare for what comes next, just as Elijah had to. After the confrontation, Elijah could have felt invincible, but that wasn't the case. He knew struggles don't end with a single victory. His spiritual journey continued, along with lessons of humility and dependence on God. The victory on Carmel paved the way for something even more extraordinary. The moment Elijah would be taken to heaven, symbolizing a unique and deep communion with God. Elijah's ascension to heaven is undoubtedly one of the most fascinating and symbolic events in the Bible. After a life marked by miracles, challenges, and unwavering faith, Elijah was taken to heaven in a whirlwind, accompanied by chariots of fire. Imagine the impact of this scene. The prophet, whose journey had been filled with moments of divine provision, rising to heaven without tasting death. This event wasn't just a spectacle. It was a divine seal on his life of faithfulness and obedience. Elijah didn't just fulfill his mission. He was honored in an extraordinary way, showing that trust in God takes us to destinations beyond what we can imagine. This moment wasn't just about Elijah, it was also a lesson for Elisha, his successor. As Elijah was taken up, he left his mantle behind for Elisha, an act full of meaning. The mantle wasn't just a garment, it represented the transfer of authority and the continuation of the prophetic mission. How often do we find ourselves in positions where we must prepare others to continue our legacy? Elijah teaches that part of our purpose is to invest in the next generation. Whether as parents, mentors, or leaders, our responsibility is to leave something of value that inspires others to move forward with courage and faith. Elijah's ascension is also a powerful metaphor for living a life directed toward heaven. It doesn't mean escaping earthly responsibilities, but living in a way that honors God in all areas. This raises a reflection. How are we managing our own journeys? Like Elijah, we all face deserts, battles, and moments of doubt. But the story shows us that those who remain faithful will experience an eternal reward. Practicing prayer, meditation on the Word, and serving others align us with this heavenly purpose. Though Elijah was taken, his story doesn't end with him. His ascension points to a future where all who trust in God will share this promise of eternal communion. But before thinking of the final destination, we are called to reflect on our walk. Just as Elijah prepared Elisha, each of us has a mission to fulfill and a legacy to leave. And in this calling, we find the true meaning of our existence. Now that you've uncovered the profound lessons from Elijah's journey, the question remains, what will you do with this knowledge? Think about it. What's holding you back from fully trusting God? Is it fear of the unknown, the weight of past, failures, or the desert-like season you're going through right now? Remember, even Elijah faced these struggles. But in his weakest moments, he experienced God's provision and found renewal. Why not take the first step today? Set aside time to listen to God's voice, not in the chaos, but in the stillness. This could be through heartfelt prayer, reading Bible stories that strengthen your faith, or extending kindness to someone in need as an act of trust in God's plan. Transformation begins with small, intentional actions that align your heart with His purpose. But here's the thing, knowing isn't enough. Action is what makes the difference. Share these insights with someone who needs them. Reflect on how you can apply Elijah's story to your life. And don't stop here. Subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you never miss content that will inspire and equip you to walk in faith, just like Elijah did. So, are you ready to step into a life of faith, provision, and divine purpose? The choice is yours. But remember, the secret that transformed Elijah's life can do the same for you, if you let it.